Well, welcome to question 73 of the secundae. The topic for this lecture will be backbiting, right? And I'm Dr. Thibault. The section that we are on is dealing with the topic of justice, the virtue of justice. It's also dealing with commutative justice, which is the justice between individuals. It's also under the topic of words, and specifically extrajudicial words. So words that don't deal with the court system, which are the topics we covered right before this. So if you want to see the judicial words in terms of commutative justice, look back to questions before 72. So you can see those. So backbiting is the second one under this extrajudicial words that are used as words as vice. Backbiting, and as you can see, we have tailbearing, derision, and cursing coming up. So backbiting itself, it's kind of an odd term you can imagine. It's not exactly literal from the Latin, but the Latin it's de trajo, which is I drag. This idea of dragging somebody down. It's also done behind somebody's back. It's done in secret. And this is really compared to our previous question, 72, reviling. So reviling was openly, publicly tearing somebody down, dishonoring somebody in front of others. And it was based out of anger. This one is different. It's not done openly and publicly to tear somebody down to their face. It's done behind their back, and it's not to break them in the same type of abusive way as reviling. But this is more secretly. You can almost think of like sinking into the mud. You know, this is really dragging somebody down behind their back. They're not even aware that it's happening when it's going on. And St. Thomas makes the distinction that it doesn't attack their honor because it's not in front of other people, but it is still destroying their good name behind their back. It's kind of an odd, an interesting, kind of quirky distinction between the two. It doesn't really lay out the real difference between dishonoring somebody and destroying their good name, other than to dishonor somebody is done publicly, you know, in front of everybody else, versus just destroying their name is more sneaky about it. As I said in the previous topic, reviling was a consequence of anger. Somebody gets angry, and then they want revenge, and in some ways, the lazy man's revenge is words. You know, to just say what you're thinking, say what you're feeling, drag somebody down as a form of revenge. So reviling was based on anger. St. Thomas in Article 3 points the idea that backbiting is not based on anger but on envy. You know, why do you talk just about somebody behind their back? Because you're envious of them. Very interesting. So he says it's done directly in four ways. He says by people behind your back saying things which are just false. There's no truth to them at all. The other one is to exaggerate somebody's sin. So the person might have a sin, but you're making it even worse than it is behind their back. Revealing something unknown to others. That would also be a form of backbiting, and to ascribe a good deed to a bad intention, which is an interesting one as well, where if you say, well, they seem to be, you know, this wonderful, heroic person, but what they're really trying to do is something awful. So, you know, you're taking their good deeds and you're turning them into bad deeds by these, you know, this idea. The most contemporary thing at the moment would be something like saying, well, these vaccines for defeating the coronavirus That's a good thing. Scientists and people have dedicated so many hours and weeks and years now to defeating, getting a cure for the coronavirus. All this effort has been put in, and to say, well, it's really their way of, it's the mark of the beast. It's some way of controlling people. It's describing bad intentions to a good deed. That would be part of backbiting if you're doing it behind someone's back. The next question, well, the first question in Article 1 is backbiting a mortal sin? And the short answer is really yes, although there's an awful lot of energy put into saying, well, not always. Backbiting, by its very nature, aims to blacken an absent person's good name, so somebody who's not there. If you overhear somebody saying something bad about you, then it's not technically backbiting because you heard it. Backbiting is behind somebody's back. Person has to be absent for backbiting. So you can see very clearly that that would be a sin against charity, against the love of neighbor as oneself. That's kind of fairly an obvious mortal sin. But if somebody were to, no, here's the examples when it's not mortal sin. And in which cases, really what he's saying is, in these cases, it seems like backbiting, but it's actually not backbiting at all. So therefore, all examples of backbiting are mortal sins. It's just not all examples of talking behind somebody's back is backbiting. So if you are lightheartedly speaking, maybe about a friend, and it's just in jest, and it's nothing malicious, and nobody, and it doesn't bring down a person's reputation, and if the person were physically present there, they would have laughed along with it too. If it's something as innocent as that, then perhaps there's no sin at all, or it could just be a venial sin, but perhaps no sin at all. Um, but if you were to make fun of somebody behind their back, and even in a jesting way, but it kind of pulls down, it makes a noble injury, as St. Thomas says, which affects one's moral character. Maybe you'll be questioning a person's chastity or their piety or their devotion to holy things. If you were to be pulling somebody down, even in jest, that could then become a greater sin, even if it's a joke. Not all jokes are absent of mortal sin. Um, if you were to talk about a person, it's not backbiting if it reveals a man's hidden sin so that he may mend it. It would be, or if you were to be denouncing it, or it's an accusation for the sake of the public good. But this one should be taken carefully because if your real goal is to help a person mend their life, then the best way to go about it isn't to talk about it without them present. How are they supposed to mend their life if you don't tell them? How does it mend their life? Person A's life if you're talking about it to person B and person C and person D, and you're talking about it to everybody other than the person who you're trying to get them to mend their life. Well, then that's in some ways I'm not sure that's that effective. If what you're doing though is you're talking to your friends and saying, I think person A might have an alcohol problem. I think we should have an intervention. Has anybody else experienced that? Right now, the purpose of that isn't to drag the person down. It's not to injure the person. It's out of concern for the person. You're talking behind their back, but you're not backbiting them. Even if it's dealing with something of a moral nature. Um, the purpose of it is to then approach the person in a pastoral way to lead to them mending their lives, then it's not backbiting. At the same time, I guess if you were to be speaking to other people who maybe they admire somebody who is doing something terrible, and you were to kind of denounce their behavior as immoral, um, I know everybody thinks that this person is funny, but I think that, what they're doing is really wrong. Well, now you're talking about somebody behind the back. In some ways, you're injuring the person. In some ways, you're tearing them down. But if the purpose of that would be to denounce a bad thing that they're doing and to kind of redirect these people kind of following along with this person, leading them astray, and to kind of redirect them on the right path. Then it's kind of mending the lives of the people who are hearing what you're saying. So if your purpose is to really put people in the right direction, then it's not backbiting. Uh, Unlike true backbiting, which only has the purpose really of just dragging somebody down for the sake of dragging somebody down, and with the motivation of envy built into it. If it's not out of envy, but out of concern for either the people, a group of people who know them, or the person themselves, then it's not strictly backbiting. So, is backbiting a mortal sin? Yes. Is all speaking behind somebody's back backbiting? No. That would be the answer. So in Article 3, I never changed the headline from the previous one, so this is a bad headline. So don't look at the headline at the top. But backboard, it says backboard, I'm all thrown now that this headline is off. A good name is better than riches, taking from a line of Proverbs. So, a person's reputation is very important. A person's good name is more important than money. Therefore, backbiting, according to its genus, is more grievous sin than theft, but less grievous than murder or adultery. So, you'd almost rather somebody steal $10 from you than tear you down behind your back, making up stories about you, telling falsehoods about you to others to tear you down. That hurts more than the loss of $10, right? You could, depending on what they're saying and what's being done, but it could be more detrimental to you, towards your happiness to tear you down in words than it would be in deeds in taking something of material value. But it's not as bad as physically murdering somebody, or the sin to the body would be done, or adultery, which injures relationships and the proper ordering of society, the proper ordering of conjugal acts and procreation, right? That has a more serious effect than just somebody speaking behind your back. Now, this part isn't left off entirely in the response to the objections. You can't help but notice that backbiting does have some degree of uh, murder in there. Uh, if you were to speak badly about somebody behind their back, if you were to tell all these lies about somebody behind their back to their friends, and now their friends hate them, uh, what Jesus says about hating your brother, right? Hating your brother is the same as murdering your brother. If you have been the cause of them to hate this person now, well, now you've caused the murder of this person by the hating of their neighbor. Right? If you say, "Oh, I heard this person say all these racist things, these terrible things, right? Awful things," and then because of that, the things you've said, nobody wants to talk to them anymore. They hate that person, and the person never even said it. Well, now you've caused the murder of this person through their hatred. So that is akin to murder, although it's still not physical murder of the body. It's murder of social relationships. Um, it also points out that backbiting is not necessarily more or less grievous than reviling. Right? In some sense, as he points out, the example of theft and robbery, right? Theft was done in secret, robbery in public. He would say that robbery is more grievous than theft because there's a risk to being murdered, right? If somebody is trying to rob you at knife point or at gunpoint, this is far more traumatic than you show up and check your bank account and you're missing $100. It's bad. The loss of $100 through robbery is worse than the loss of $100 through theft. Uh, you know, there's no risk to your life in the stealing. Um, but he says this is different because backbiting, depending on what people are saying behind your back and how awful and how convincing they are, they might be doing more harm than somebody who just says something in public. At least if somebody says something in public, you have a chance to defend yourself. If somebody says it behind your back, and they're really going at it, it might actually do more damage to you. So just because it's in secret doesn't mean that it's less grievous in this example. Um, he then asks, is listening to backbiters a sin? How bad is it to listen to backbiters? Should we just be patient with backbiters, or is there, or should we have to fight against backbiting? And he says, quoting from St. Jerome, take care not to have an itching tongue or an itching ear, that is neither detract others nor listen to backbiting. And he does point out that he says, if the sin is not pleasing, if hearing the backbiting is not pleasing to you, then it may only be a venial sin to be listening to it, and a much greater sin for the person actually saying it. And the example he kind of gives for this would be, let's say, you know, you're you work for a company and your boss is going off on this stuff and you're afraid to say anything. Maybe you're new in your job, right? You're afraid if you say something, there could be retaliation against you. People start saying, "What do you think? You're so holy. You're so great. You think you're so perfect." Right? If there's a legitimate concern, if there's fear, you don't want to be in this conversation. You don't know how you got stuck in this conversation. You just hope that this conversation gets over as quickly as possible, but you don't want to hurt yourself in the meantime, and you don't really believe anything these people are saying anyway. The fact that you listened is still a venial sin, but it's not, you are not an equal contributor to the backbiting in the same way as if you're saying, "Oh, tell me more." If you're titillated by the idea and you're questioning and you're buying into the backbiting, now you're an equal participant in this. So there's degrees in which you are culpable for your participation in backbiting by listening. Um, uh, and this is different than reviling. If we look to the example of reviling, he said, is there any virtue in just showing patience when you're being reviled? And he said, to some degree there is. There's to some degree there's some virtue, and if somebody's yelling nasty things, they're lying, they're saying fake things about you in front of other people, and you can just stand there and let them go. There's some virtue in your patience. He ultimately, if you could go back to question 72 on this, but ultimately says you should stop them because if they go along with this for too long, they start thinking that they're smart and wise, and it's not for the good of their soul to be allowed to continue saying these things. It's also if they're a bully, like revilers can be bullies, they might bully somebody else next. So stopping them and putting them in their place does have a greater good, but you shouldn't try to do it to save your own honor. Some degree of patience is a wise virtue in that situation. This is different though, because the person who's being a backbiter isn't backbiting you, they're backbiting somebody else. So whereas the reviler is trying to destroy your reputation, well, then you can allow somebody to try to destroy your reputation and not be affected by it because ultimately, who cares what they think? Who cares what other people think, right? Ultimately. So reviling, you can be patient, but for this is some, this is lowering somebody else's good name. You're destroying, but this is participating in some destroying somebody else's good name. You don't really have the advantage of saying, "Yeah, I'm okay with just letting somebody else's good name be destroyed." You can let your own name be destroyed, good name be destroyed, but to say, "Oh yeah, I don't really have a problem with destroying Jack's reputation." Well, if you don't care that this person is destroying Jack's reputation, you're not a very good brother, right? You're actually now lacking charity to your brother whose name is being destroyed, and here you are, you're not bothered by it, right? Would you be bothered if that person were stealing that person's money? If that person were stealing that person's telephone, uh, You just say, "Oh, I'm patient. I allow that person to steal that other person's cell phone." Well, that's not patience. To allow somebody to steal somebody else's belonging. If you want to let somebody steal your cell phone, that's fine. But to allow somebody to steal somebody else's cell phone, that's just a lack of concern for your neighbor. Uh, if you're the one that you find out that you have been having somebody talk badly about you behind your back, um, you find out about this later on, then there is merit in your patience, right? If you find out that somebody was talking bad about you, and you go, well, I'll pray for them, or maybe I'll have a talk with them. Uh, but you're not getting all caught up. You're not going to get revenge. You're not angry. By being patient in that, then you've been given some type of grace, and you're participating in virtue. This virtue isn't because of the person who did the backbiting, it's because of God is so great. The person who did the backbiting can't say, see, I'm causing all these people to gain grace and develop virtue. No, you're in mortal sin. You've lacked charity. The fact that people are responding to your lack of charity with kindness, patience, virtue, is not because of you, but because of God's grace. In conclusion, this again very short section, only 4 articles. Backbiting is kind of literally translating dragging one down. I drag someone down, and you're dragging down the person's good name, and it is done behind their back. Backbiting is strictly speaking a mortal sin, but it's not always backbiting to talk behind somebody's back. If the reason why you're talking behind their back is to correct, or to put your audience in the right direction in terms of their own moral life, or for the good and protection of the person who you're talking about, then it's not backbiting. Backbiting is more grievous sin, than a sin against one's property, even though it's a sin of words rather than a sin of deeds. But it's not as bad as murder or physically hitting someone. Um, Naming a person would be worse than just talking about it. And listening to backbiters is participating in it. So, whenever you're listening to a backbiter, you're either, if you're actively engaged in it, mortally sinning, or if you're kind of trying to get out of it, but you're not stopping it, then venial sin. Um, and you really don't have the ability to just say, well, I'm going to be patient. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Because because the sin isn't against you, it's against somebody else. So keep letting the person sin against somebody else isn't within your jurisdiction to allow somebody else to be spoken badly about. And that's all we have on question 73, and we have a few more to go. Have a great day.